right? So this is this is joint work with Rafi Ostrovsky, Michele Chiampi, and Yun Lu. And what I'm going to tell you about is in the context of consensus, but focusing on blockchain. So very, very quickly, so you've seen this many times, sometimes also here. How does a blockchain protocol operate? We have our, let's think of them as miners or minters or nodes that maintain the blockchain. And they try to preserve a state, which is a chain of blocks connected via hash pointers. And the blockchain, what it does is it periodically chooses the next guy to propose the block, who then kind of gets to propose it, tells to everyone that's the next block, and by some mechanism they include the block. So the core properties of any such protocol are answering two questions. Who can propose the next block? So how do we choose the next block proposer? And then how can we have nodes agree on the fact that he was chosen and his block, all right? And just to give you examples of this thing, so we have like a proof of work, where the answer here is people work, and there is an implicit lottery biased by the amount of work people do, the amount of hashing power they invest, and that's how we choose whoever, on average, invests more hashing power will get to be chosen for the next block, or like proof of stake, more intuitive, whoever has more stake in the system has more chances of being selected. And then the second question, how do we agree? There's two types of protocols. We saw both of them in this session. One of them is the so-called Nakamoto style. This is following the Bitcoin paradigm, which is we will select whenever I want to choose between two chains, I will select the one with most blocks or most work, and then the Byzantine fault-tolerant paradigm, which is just run consensus. All right, so what are the key properties that we want from any blockchain protocol? And this is already the first oxymoron of the blockchain community. So our core security relies in how can we get consensus, and we cannot even agree on how to call consistency, right? So depending on who you ask, they're going to call it consistency, safety, common prefix, and this is because we are different disciplines that stubbornly stick to our own terminology. So all those notions are supposed to say that the nodes will eventually converge on the ledger state. And there's like different flavors, what is called Nakamoto finality, which is like they will converge, but there will be some slackness. So if you ignore the last few blocks, then any two nodes will have, one will have a prefix of the other. Or there is what we call instant finality, which is if a block is added on one node state, then shortly after this will be added on every node state. Right. So then, again, two names, liveness and availability, depending on whether you ask a blockchain researcher or a cryptographer system researcher. So it just says that the blockchain doesn't get stuck, right? So there is a speed, let's call it a lambda, by which new blocks are added. And there's a new property which thankfully is unique to us. It's transaction liveness, which is saying that transactions that are sent by honest guys are added within some reasonable time. And again, you can think of a speed parameter, how fast are those added, right? So what would a typical statement be in this realm? When you think of proof of work, a typical statement would be if the majority of the hashing power is in honest hands, then we can get all these properties. Right? We can get security. Proof of stake, similarly, and you can also kind of think this, what is recently termed proof of X, proof of some resource. Space-time is one resource which we saw already here, which is if some assumption, let's call it AX, about resource X holds, then we get the property. So a few years back, we termed this thing resource-restricted cryptography, but again, we cannot agree on a common name. Anyway, so the question that this talk is about, this paper is about, is what if AX fails? I have a blockchain, a monolithic blockchain, let's say proof of work. What if the proof of work assumption fails? What if I have majority of corrupted hashing power, or 2/3 of corrupted hashing power, or like all but one node being corrupted, and that this one not has one hashing ring, all right? And you can answer this question in many ways, right? There's the traditional kind of cryptographic kind of assumption implies security way, which is, yeah, don't worry, it won't fail, right? Honest majority is my assumption, and it's going to be secure. Right? We know how this ends up, all right? All right. So there is the more DeFi financial economics answer to this, which is we are going to show that it's not in the interest of nodes to make the assumption fail. And this actually is, in my understanding, what underpins Ripple's security, right? Ripple has this kind of sets of validators, and it gets security only if those sets intersect, but they're locally generated, so their argument is that there is an incentive to have them intersect. But many mechanisms that we also have seen here, especially in DeFi, are part of this paradigm. Like, if you think of collateralization and stake slashing is also part of this paradigm. And, when we prove that, for example, Bitcoin is stable under some assumptions, that's also part of it, right? All right. There is another answer, which goes to a paper we had last year, which is, okay, I will give a guarantee. If this violation is temporary, I will give some guarantee that it will, the system will heal. So, for example, if for a while the work on the system goes majority to the adversary because the good guys drop, or the stake on the system goes to the majority of the stake on the system goes to the adversary, I will still show that the system will self-heal. So eventually it will converge, and somehow I will have an arbitrary rule for resolving. So the answer that we care in this work is, can we actually fortify the assumption with another assumption? And this follows kind of a pattern which was also used in some talks in the previous session, like Tim's talk had the similar flavor, and the first talk of this session had also the similar flavor. All right, so what are our results concretely, and I'm going to discuss how they differentiate from other solutions. We give a Layer-1, it's one new Layer-1 protocol, which actually combines two resources, let's say stake and, well, we'll go to reputation and stake, but we give a generic way of doing it. And what I mean by generic is we are using the underlying chain's mechanism in a kind of black box manner, but one miner of one chain can write to the other. So we're not modifying the mechanism, but there can be miners from one chain can read from the other, and they can write to the other. Again, this is one. Think of it as one Layer-1 solution, which actually uses two Layer-1 solutions inside it. It's going to be more concrete in a few minutes. All right. So what we achieve is that if there's a primary and a secondary assumption. So if the primary assumption, let's call it AX, holds, then the blockchain achieves all its security properties, safety, liveness, and transaction liveness, no matter what happens on the secondary assumption, right? So it's not a trade-off between how much one assumption fails. The second assumption can fail arbitrarily. Now, if the primary assumption fails, and again, I don't care by how much, as long as the secondary assumption is still not violated, we will have security, but liveness will get a hit. We'll get a slower speed. And what we do is we identify the properties that you need on those two blockchains to actually be able to combine them in this way. And we also instantiate this paradigm with one resource being reputation, the other one being stake, which will give us some very nice properties like instant payments and low-risk credit loans, kind of. This is going to come to the end. All right. So let me just tell you quickly what is known, what are the origins of this kind of two-tier blockchain. I mean, to cryptographers, that's not new, right? So cryptographers, we've had like a fallback security. We've looked at cryptographic combiners for quite a while. To blockchain, it's more new, but not entirely. So there was a result back in 2017 by Pass and C, Vanderella, that was trying to do a kind of a version of, I think, what Tim described in the first session, which is get a combination of two solutions where I can have an optimistic mode. If I have like less than 1/3 of hashing power being adversarial, this will give no issues, no safety, no liveness violations. And if it is not the case, as long as the majority of hashing power is still in good hands, I will get a fallback mechanism that I can go back to, and it can sanitize things and get me back to the 1/3 fast path. And then there was another system more recently, Meshkas by Bentov et al., that was using a proof of space-time and a much more complicated DAG-based structure, and I'm not going to get into it. All right. So the issue with both of them, or kind of what differentiates both of those approaches with what we're trying to get, is that if the fallback assumption fails, the whole system fails. Now, there is a more recent thread which is based on giving different weights on resources so that I can, for example, kind of combine proof of work and proof of stake. This is exactly the type of work that was presented, the first work presented in this session, which gets closer to that, but still I need to somehow figure out how to combine them. So if you try to apply this to a setting where one of the resources is fully adversarial, well, what you would need to do is put like full weight on one of the resources. And the question is, where do you draw the line? And we don't want to have to do that. All right. So instead, our starting point is a paper we had with Len Kleinrock and Rafi Ostrovsky a few years back, which uses, the paper uses proof of reputation and proof of stake. So X is reputation and X prime is stake. And what it gets is kind of exactly what we want. I'm going to tell you in what sense it doesn't. So we get full security if the reputation system is accurate and feasible. That's the assumption, and I'm going to say what it means. And we get, even if this is not the case, we get safety as long as the majority of the stake is in honest hands. So let me quickly, very, very quickly tell you how this thing works. I don't want to spend too much time. But the idea is that you can run a BFT-style consensus mechanism where the probability of nodes being chosen is weighted by their reputation. The reputation, you can think of it as a vector of values between 0 and 1 that indicate how honest, what is the probability of a party being honest. All right? So what we were doing back then is, whoops, that's a nice animation, but when you roll back, it's a problem. Right. We choose using this reputation, we choose a set of validators and a set of proposers. And then the block creation happens inside this set, the proposer set, the validators by Byzantine broadcast, and the validators, the proposers broadcast by Byzantine broadcast their transactions. Everyone picks them up, signs them, and disseminates them to the whole set. And then a transaction is considered as valid, like a block is considered as valid, if it has a certificate of validity with a majority of signatures from that committee. And then we select a new committee and so on. So this is kind of standard iterated BFT, but using reputation. All right, so very quickly, what does it mean? What does this assumption mean? So the reputation system being accurate means that it reflects, so this vector of probabilities reflects the ground truth, reflects the actual probability that parties will deviate. And feasible means that if I have this system, I can select honest majority committees with good probability. And it's not hard to see what this means. It means that if I would order everyone according to reputation and get the top reputation folks, then the probability of honest majority is high. So what we did in that paper was focus on fairness. And we completely left out, we did not leave out. We had the mechanism for how to do the fallback, but it was missing some things. So how was the fallback mechanism working? So the idea is that the primary chain works in normal mode, uses reputation, and it checkpoints, in some sense itself, on the secondary chain. So there are no transactions on the secondary chain. So this thing continues, like things get certified on the secondary chain. And so at some point, if there is a fork, so this means that the primary assumption failed, I don't know how badly. If it fails, Then what's going to happen is some guy which is on one of the fork tines is going to post a certificate on his block, and someone who's on the other fork tine, maybe slightly later, will post another certificate. We said that if the primary assumption fails, we will assume that the secondary doesn't. So this will be picked up. It will be observed on the secondary chain. That will be a certificate of failure, pretty much, those two things. And part is in that paper, what we were doing is we were then ignoring the primary chain and moving to the secondary. All right? So, two things to observe here is that this creates kind of a two tiers of transactions. Those are one tier transactions that appear on the primary chain. If I trust reputation, I can just actually act on them. And the other one is what we call fully confirmed transaction, which is they appear on the primary chain, and they are certified on the secondary chain. Someone said OK, and enough time passed on the secondary chain so that there's no dispute. The other thing to observe is that the only thing I need in this mechanism is a certificate of safety violation, which I can get for arbitrary bad failures of the assumption because I have signatures. All right? So what we did not do there, we did not look at liveness. We did not look at transaction liveness. We had a very bad way of falling back to the secondary chain. Very bad meaning like we would ignore the primary chain and never go back to it. And we did not explicitly discuss the interaction between the two resources. And we did not address kind of how to compute the reputation in the first place. So I will not discuss this last part because that's part of another paper, which is also a very recent paper. I will discuss whatever I can from the first few items. All right? I want to start with the first one, which is how do we account for liveness? So first of all, why this is interesting? Because, 3 minutes, okay. Why this is interesting? Well, we can have easily certificate of safety violation if we go to the dishonest majority realm. But a certificate of liveness is not easy. In fact, we know that it's impossible in the dishonest majority setting. All right, so how can we actually detect liveness? The idea is that in that case, we have dishonest majority, liveness failed there, but we do still have the secondary chain. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually have people tell on the folks that are violating liveness on the secondary chain. The idea is there's a rotating committee of folks that actually report when they do not receive blocks on the secondary chain. And if I get out of this committee a majority, this is a stake and reputation, but you can think of it as stake, biased committee. If I see that the majority of stake, or a sample of stake, tells me that there is a liveness violation, I'm going to react to it. I'm going to treat it as some sort of POS certificate, and I'm going to say why I call it that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give people the ability to dispute it. Disputing it means posting the block on the POS chain. If there's no response, then I'm going to treat it as a certificate, and I'm going to fall back to the secondary chain. All right. So why this works? The ancient Greeks knew about blockchain, and in his talk at the symposium, Socrates actually asked the same question. So why bother with these extra steps? Right? You have a certificate, and the answer is, if I don't do that, then I will have the same problem that other solutions had. If the secondary assumption fails, then the whole system fails. There's chaos, right? Because if the stake has a bad if the majority of stake is in bad hands, such certificates can be easily generated. So I cannot use them immediately to fall back. But if I wait for it to be reported, then I can actually prove with a parametric play that I get exactly what I want. If AR holds, then if AR reputation holds, then I have liveness without violating safety. And even if it's violated, safety still is not violated from the first rule, from the first way that I described before. And what I will get is either I will get liveness but slower, because now I'm waiting for people to fill in the gaps on the POS chain, or I will get a detection of liveness. So I don't exactly get a certificate of liveness, but I get then, best next thing. All right. So I think I'm going to just do a transaction liveness and stop. So For transaction liveness, what's the issue? Liveness doesn't give me transaction liveness, right? So even if I can see new blocks, I don't know that those new blocks include all honest transactions, right? So liveness is not violated, but that doesn't guarantee transaction liveness. So the way we solve that is by, when a node observes a transaction liveness, then he reports on the secondary chain, and by some mechanism, which unfortunately I don't have the time to discuss, this kind of is picked up there and brought back to the primary chain. And if nodes see that it's not resolved on the primary, nodes that run the secondary chain see that too much, like I complain to the guys running the proof of stake that my transaction is not there. They all try to put my transaction in. If they also observe that they fail, then actually they can roll back on the secondary chain. And that's again an observable event. That's a certificate of failure of transaction liveness that I can create because of the secondary chain. So I will, had some very nice animations, but I'm going to run through them. I'm not showing them. Going to the end. All right. So yes, good. Oh no, not yet. Here. Now good. I think that's probably an hour talk. All right. So we do solve all these issues, and most of them are kind of a dance of parameters: speed of the one chain versus speed of the other chain. We'll refer you to the paper for the details.
Okay, thank you. Because of lack of time, you have maybe one quick question.
Very interesting talk. So my question here is, like, if you're creating like a two-tier system, like, are we giving up like perfect decentralization here? And so you're starting to move more towards like a little bit of a hierarchy here, or a little bit of like two-tier thing here. So are there any compromise on the ideal decentralization?
I don't see one. I mean, these two tiers are one. They both depend on two assumptions on the resources that the system might have, right? So it's just a different type of an assumption. In fact, this way, what we get is we, to some extent, mitigate the problem of the correlation between stake and reputation that you might have in proof of stake systems that try to build reputation systems on top of them. Right. So we decouple them, and we say, okay, if we will consider one resource, full decentralization with one resource, if that fails, we'll consider another resource on the same system. It's on the same blockchain. They're not different systems. So no, I would say.
Sure. Another quick question, like, do you assume any sort of like collusion between nodes and these two tiers of blockchains?
They are the same. That's why I said it's one layer, one solution. I'm just using two properties of the ledger state. One is the reflected reputation, which is on the ledger. The other one is the stake distribution. But it's the same ledger. The same guys run both chains.
I see. It's essentially the same nodes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.